Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay. I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? You know, on Plain Talk, we talk a lot about criminal defense. And the reason for that is because it, not by design, but by circumstance, underpins so much of the public policy debates that we have. If you're concerned about civil rights and constitutional law and everything, the rubber meets the road in the criminal justice system. If you're concerned about homelessness or things like addiction, that's where the rubber meets the road a lot of times in the criminal justice system. People who are struggling with those issues, people who are accused of serious crimes by the government, or instances where the government behaves irresponsibly or unprofessionally or oversteps the bounds or runs roughshod over people's constitutional rights. The place where we get accountability for that, probably more often than any other venue, is the criminal justice system. Now, heading into this last legislative session earlier this year, we had an interview with Travis Finck, who is the director of the Commission on Legal Counsel for Indigence in North Dakota. He said at the time that we were perilously, I'm quoting now, we were perilously close to a constitution of failure. And the reason for that is he didn't have the resources. We had people, right? We all know you have a constitutional right to legal counsel when you're accused of a crime. And we had North Dakotans who were going before the courts and weren't, they were facing some hearings at times and they weren't getting legal counsel. So it was a perilous situation. The legislative session has ended, and the legislature, to their credit, gave the North Dakota Council on Indigent Defense a 20% increase, a $4.5 million budget increase over their 2023 budget. They went from 20% increase. I thought I had the figures in front of me. I don't have the figures, but $4.5 million more. So that's a good boost. So we wanted to bring Travis back to talk about that and to get a little update on that situation. Because again, I think this is an overlooked area of public policy. And people don't understand how if you never commit a crime or you're never accused of a crime and you never end up standing in a criminal court, which is going to be the case for most of us. Most of us will never be in that position. What the work that criminal defense attorneys do still matters to you. Travis, first of all, with that intro, tell us a little bit, $4.5 million increase, 20% increase in your budget. Tell us where that leaves you now going forward.
Yeah, good morning, Rob. Good morning, Chad. It leaves us in a position where we're headed in the right direction. And so, I have made some comments recently in some other articles and some other things that, before it felt as if when we were trying to recruit or retain attorneys, we weren't even in the same stadium, right? And I think what this does is this gives us a fighting chance, because I think as, public defenders and working for a public defender office, you have an opportunity to make a real impact on people's lives or the criminal legal system, as you were just mentioning, Rob, in your intro, that, there's a real possibility to make a difference when we do this type of work. So we feel like that's a selling point for us. We've just never been able to compete because we haven't been close. With the investment that the legislature has made, we've been able to start offering some higher salaries for some persons who are incoming. We're also in the process of implementing a new compensation plan, essentially, for our whole agency that puts us on par with places like the Attorney General's office and the court and things like that. All of the people that we're competing with talent for. So now that we're in that arena, I hate to even say this publicly, but knock on wood, if people pass the bar, we will be fully staffed come September. And we were looking at, 25-30% vacancy at the time the legislature started the last time we chatted. And so just that influx, and part of it is too, when I'm having these conversations with individuals who are applying for jobs, and we're having these conversations, people notice that the legislature has put investment into the Commission on Legal Counsel, and we're not just, a forgotten about agency, and they understand, and the North Dakota legislature understands the importance of what we do and how we do it.
So, Travis, this is sort of exciting. I feel like Rob and I were on this journey with you because at the beginning of the session, we talked about this, and frankly, I learned a lot during that process. And you had a successful session and helped educate the legislature on how important this was. So, congratulations, and congratulations to the legislature. We're usually on here complaining about the legislature, so it's nice we can talk about something that was done well. But when we talked before the session, one of the things you talked about was not only competing for attorneys and getting in the stadium, as you say, but also being able to hire investigators. Is this going to allow you to hire? I think you said you had one investigator statewide before the session. Is that another place where you might be able to add some staff?
Yeah, so our budget had asked for 5 additional full-time employees that would have been investigator positions, so we would have had 1 in each office. What the legislature did is they approved us for 2 new FTEs, and we're in the process right now of posting those advertisements and hiring those, and those will be investigator positions. So we will, go from 1 until up till 3 investigators for the agency, which obviously will help significantly. I've said it, I started off this way. We're headed in the right direction. I don't think we're there yet. Congratulations to me is hard to accept because it seems like the job is done. I think we're moving in the right direction, and we're not there yet, but we're headed in the right direction, and extremely grateful for the amount of attention and the funding that the legislature put into us this last session.
Yeah, and that's true of everywhere. Nobody's declaring victory here.
Right.
And the truth is the debate's never done on any of this stuff. There's always new challenges, but by the time the next legislative session rolls around, your office will probably be facing new issues and new challenges that we're not even thinking about right now. That's just the way the world works. Give us some insight. One thing you really talked about was, and you touched on this a little bit, was attorney recruitment. And obviously a big part of that, I mean, if you have a law degree, there's some earning potential with that. There's a lot of things you can do with that. And working for indigent defense is not at the top of the heap of ways you could use your law degree to make money. Listen, people who invest their time and their resources and achieve something like that, have a right to, I'm not blaming people who use their law degrees to make lots of money. Good on them. But it's hard. I mean, that's your recruitment. So what specifically, I know part of it's pay. I think you were able to increase what you're paying. But also not just for your staff attorneys, but also when you contract with attorneys, you can pay more. Talk a little bit more about that. And are there other ways of providing benefits or compensation to them that make this sort of work a little bit more attractive?
Yeah, and just to back up a little bit, you said we're not at the top of the heap. Well, I think we should be at the top of the heap because we're one of the few attorneys where you can actually make a difference in someone's lives. We get to represent real people, and we can actually help change their lives, and that's not something a lot of people can do. Now, if you look at it from the monetary thing,
I meant top of the heap monetarily. That's what I was.
And maybe we'll get there too, Rob. So that's obviously what my goal is. But yeah, so I mean, obviously, we have been able to increase the compensation for lawyers, and I think that will help with retention. And also, clearly, it's helped with recruitment. We had a couple of people that were considering different offers, and then once the legislative session was going on and it looked like we were going to get this investment, knowing they'd be coming on later, I did make a higher offer, and then they accepted it right away, right? And so clearly we can tell that makes a difference. I think the other thing is people understand we're trying to build a client-centered culture, and I think that's attractive to people who are coming out of law school, right? Is we want to make sure, and I've said this before in public speeches, any decision I make as the director is always looking through the lens of how's this going to impact our clients we serve. And so when we look at that, I think trying to establish that, building more support staff, having investigators on staff that people can use is huge. Obviously, Rob, you know the importance of an investigator. We've talked about that before. But then having good support staff too, and being able to pay support staff what they're worth. And so everyone has a more buy-in to the approach that we're trying to achieve, where when we can start maintaining some continuity, obviously that builds towards job satisfaction as well. So I think all of these things are things that this investment will allow us to work towards.
One quick follow-up. Does it help? I mean, we're talking about finances, but I mean, it seemed like the legislature kind of took, a healthy perspective on this. Does that sense of kind of where the legislature is at politically help with? Because I mean, if I was working in an office like yours, and the sense I was getting from the legislature is that they're just hostile to our budget, or they're hostile to spending more on this, that would be demoralizing to me, and that make me think, maybe I'll go spend my time somewhere else. So does it help that the legislature kind of made a statement, that they're committed to this?
Absolutely. I mean, we've had those conversations with applicants, even people from out of state who have started looking at coming to North Dakota, recognizing that the North Dakota legislature acknowledges the public defenders exist in the state and the important role they play. So, absolutely, that matters.
So I think that's such an important point. I mean, I think about the folks I work in public education and the message that they hear from the legislature at times, and they want to hear that the legislature values the work that they're doing. And I assume that's no different, Travis, on the folks that are working in your office. It does help morale that the legislature is like, yep, you're important, and that's why we're investing in you. Speaking of the legislature, though, how do you think, or why do you think this session you were able to get that message through a little bit? Was it the concern about us not living up to our constitutional obligations? Or, I mean, so why did they get it this time and maybe they haven't gotten it in previous sessions?
Well, I guess if I knew that answer, I'd
You
probably
would have gotten it done previous
not be
sessions.
working and would have gotten it done previous sessions. But I think part of the reality is, and this is discussions we've had internally, is something like this doesn't happen overnight, right? There has to be continually being present with legislators, them starting to understand and trust that what we're bringing is actual requests and not pie in the sky budget requests. Us being straightforward and honest with how we spend those monies when they're entrusted to us. So all of those things, when you start establishing that track record, I think a lot of that matters. And obviously, as you both know, um, relationships matter, right? So building those relationships and building that trust, that when we are entrusted with monies and programs and things like that, that we get them done and we do them in an effective manner. So I don't think that this session was just all of a sudden the light bulb went off. I think it's just been growing, right? And I think it does help some of the things that have been going on nationally, right? I mean, we were able to look at counsel at first appearances, and we were able to get Senate Bill 2226 passed, which presumes someone who's in custody to be indigent, so we can start having counsel at all initial appearances across the state, which is something I've been gravely concerned about in the state of North Dakota for quite a while. And, it helps that at the same time, Arkansas was going through litigation on this, right? So it brought all the research together. So it wasn't as if we had to go and get the research. It was all already being done and being gone through. So I think the reality is it was just a process over time, and there was just a bunch of different factors that came together. And obviously it relies upon champions in the legislature too. And I think we had those.
Do you feel like the public's fascination with true crime has helped with this at all? And the reason I say that is I have kind of a love-hate relationship with that thing, because on one hand, the way they do it sometimes, we're really sensationalizing some not good people at times, or we're forgetting that these are real people, both the victims and the accused and everything else. But one thing I think one positive thing is I think in some ways the public's fascination with it has kind of given them insight into the criminal justice system that's not like Law and Order. And they see sometimes what a criminal defendant who might be innocent is up against, and how important it is to make sure that they have the resources. Do you feel like that's helped with at least the voter level perception of your job?
Yeah, I don't think it hurts, right? I mean, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when, I started in the practice of law, there wasn't a lot of it other than, cops TV show, right? And now you're seeing a lot more of the other perspective and what goes on. And I mean, you had Matlock, I guess, as the one defense attorney show ever, right? But now there's
Hey,
getting to
well,
be
let's not bring up Perry Mason.
Perry Mason, sure. I mean, right. So you get through, I mean, I think as society changes and you look at different what people are watching and reading and everything else, sure, I think that ultimately plays a part. And I also think it's been a success of our legislature and our state and our agency to make sure we are having those conversations and putting ourselves out there, making ourselves available, and having media individuals like yourselves who are interested in the topic and putting it out there for your listeners.
Travis, you mentioned earlier that one of the reasons you were able to get this done is because you had legislative champions. We often talk about the bad guys in the legislature, and maybe we don't do such a great job of raising up or lifting up those people who are doing the hard work. Who are those champions that help get you get this done? Well, let's name some names here.
See, and I shouldn't. A lawyer should always know not to say something if you know there's a follow-up question coming that you don't want to answer. No, I think in reality, and maybe I'll dance around it just because that's how I do things. But I think in reality, everyone who served on our appropriations this year understood it, right? People understood just in general that this is a situation where, because we've built those relationships and those sort of deals that we have when we're coming and asking for these things, these are things we really need. So I mean, you can look across the board on Senate Appropriations and Government Operations Division and House Appropriations and Government Operations Division, and then just across the line, even many of the members in the judiciary and just people who are familiar with our circumstance who aren't afraid to say, yeah, it's important. I mean, if you need to have names, I guess I would look at the people in government operations, and then, of course, there's people in both the Senate and House Judiciary committees, including the chairs that have been very supportive of the commission and our mission. So, yeah, I
So, is
kind of
it
danced around it, but
No, that's fine. But is it helpful to have a governor who understands the criminal justice system?
oh, I, 100%. I mean, there's no doubt that Governor Armstrong, and he was, very important in helping us get this council at first appearances, and him and his staff were the ones that came forward and suggested maybe the delayed implementation date of January 1st to make sure we have the program set up right, and to make sure not only that we're having council at first appearances, but we're doing it in the right way and making sure that it's effective in the program we're delivering. So I think certainly that doesn't downplay some of the progress we made under previous administrations, but certainly having Governor Armstrong has helped significantly for us.
Do you feel like, and talking about sort of the tone, and I agree with you. I feel like we have been moving towards, I think maybe a more fulsome and more nuanced understanding of criminal justice issues in North Dakota for a while. We had a big fight over corrections. But the Attorney General had a point of view that I think is sort of, when I wrote about it, I think it's sort of divergent from the trend that we've had, where he's very much, and I'm not trying to impugn his motivations or anything, because he's concerned about crime and public safety, and those are valid. But he has a very much sort of lock him up, throw the book at him mentality that I perceive as being divergent from this. So it's kind of interesting to have watched, he got very, very close to getting his legislation passed. It's kind of interesting to watch that juxtaposed with what the legislature did with your budget. Because those are kind of two different schools of thought or philosophies about all this.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, obviously, policy spills over into budget, and budget oftentimes spills over into policy, right? But I think the reality is, our budget really isn't. Some people would view it as maybe sometimes a partisan budget, but it's really not. And it especially has not been in North Dakota, which has been the good thing, right? Because people understand that we provide that service regardless of what angle you're coming from. When it comes to policy, whether it's, minimum mandatory sentences or truth in sentencing, you know, our role in that in the budget process has been, if there is an increased cost to that, we need to make sure that we're funded for that, because especially going into this last session and as we were going through the session, when you get so close to a point of failure, any more weight you add onto that, if you have a bridge that's starting to sag and it's about ready to bust, you put any more weight on that, it's going to break. And that's a real concern that we have. So while I think they interplay, I don't know that it's logically inconsistent.
So, Travis, one of the things that we've seen from the previous administration and this administration is a real focus on addiction and rehabilitation, led by Jonathan Holt. I assume by going upstream and working on issues of addiction and rehabilitation, that is actually helpful to your office. I would imagine your clientele I don't want to say overwhelmingly, but a big chunk of those folks do have issues with substance abuse. So is that something that you see as potentially being helpful in terms of your workload, and maybe to allow you guys to better help the clients you're helping if we do a better job on addiction and substance abuse in the state of North Dakota?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in dealing with Jonathan, and I think he's done a great job in the role that he's been playing in this administration. And, really some of the bills, again, that the legislature put forward this last session, such as, House Bill 1425, that allows for these diversionary type of programs with individuals who are dealing with some of these issues. And you look across the state, we have drug courts that have been immensely successful in the state of North Dakota. They're also looking at standing up, mental health courts. So these are clearly drivers of what's going on as substance abuse and mental health issues, and they're often co-occurring conditions, right? Where one might be leading to the other or vice versa. And so obviously if we can get a handle on that and move that upstream and that cuts down on our workload, that's great. I mean, we've been saying since even going back to when Governor Burgum first came in and had this real big focus on, mental health issues, we always had all this money on the back end in prison for, and that's important. But as we started to move money upstream, I've been fairly vocal about the fact that we spend more time as the appointed counsel for these individuals than most of the other providers within the system. So it's important as well that, and I think my attorneys have really bought into this, that we're looking at this and how can we help that client not only get through this case, but how can we help them so they're not back in this situation again? I mean, I think every public defender would tell you the best thing we could do is not have any work, because that means everyone is well and doing well, right? Obviously we know that's not going to happen, but obviously moving those resources upstream is extremely beneficial, and I know a lot of my attorneys are extremely grateful for the progress we've been making in that regard as well.
Last question, Travis. We mentioned this a little bit earlier in the interview that these debates are never over. You said we're moving in the right direction. What's next? And understanding that the next legislative session is a long ways away. But what's the next steps on this? I mean, what else does your office need to continue moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so in Travis's perfect world, which is a scary place, I grant it, but in Travis's perfect world, I would love to, have more investigators on staff. So we have enough investigators where we could have one dedicated to each office. So we're fully investigating each and every case that comes through our door. We would love to continue to develop models where we can really wrap services around that individual to help with that recidivism thing and we know one of the main drivers in driving down recidivism is to help people get jobs, help them find housing, help them become stable. So, as we look at potentially trying to move more of that holistic approach to the front end, I think obviously that helps move things in the right direction. One thing, with the budget that we're continually looking at is we do have a special fund, which was created back when the legislature created the agency, which has been typically funded off user fees. Well, one of the things House Bill 1417 did was removed that application fee. And so they reduced, or that was replaced with general fund dollars. But the reality is we're not collecting what we're allowed to spend out of that special fund. So at a certain point, we're going to have to look at, can we rely upon that special fund, or is that going to have to be replaced with general fund dollars as well? So there's still some things that we need to move in that direction of. I'm a big believer that we shouldn't be funding constitutional rights off the people who are exercising the constitutional rights, and House Bill 1417 moved us in the right direction on that. There's still some other fines and fees that exist for every defendant who's going through a case. We really need to take a look at whether or not, there's a lot of research on whether or not courts should be revenue centers or courts should be trying to dispense justice. So as I said, we're moving in the right direction, but there's always room for improvement.
Travis, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Travis.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished with Travis Finck. And I'm not lying. This is one of the most consequential areas of public policy that we deal with. It's so important. I think Travis was absolutely right to be sounding the alarm bells back in January when we talked to him that we're on the edge of a constitutional crisis. Imagine that. And also imagine what it costs the taxpayers if an organization like the ACLU or somebody decides to sue the state of North Dakota because we aren't providing proper legal counsel to people who have a constitutional right to it. Well, think how much that's going to cost us in lawyers. Think how much that's going to cost us if they win. And now we're put in a situation where maybe the federal courts decide that they're going to direct our spending on this stuff and not our elected leaders. It was just, first of all, it's the right thing to do, the moral thing to do. It's the lawful thing to do because the Constitution requires this of us. And, it's the prudent thing to do because, the last thing we want is to get sued.
Yeah, and I like that we had Travis back on to sort of bring this story full circle, also recognizing it's not over, right? Obviously, like with all funding.
Let's give credit where it's due. A 20% increase is a big deal.
It's a big deal. And we both know that Travis and his staff, they grind every day, right? They're grinding. Travis said he's been up there for 6 years sounding the alarm to sort of get this moving. And so I'm glad that the legislature did the right thing here. I think there's still work to be done. This is such a touch point for so many things we talk about, right? It's addiction. It's all these different things that we want to make sure these folks, and I love when Travis talks about the goal of that department is to not see these folks again. They want to get them the services they need. They don't want to just get through this issue or this trial, but figure out how to get, it's almost like a social services sort of conduit, right? It's not just getting through a trial, but it's also pointing them in the right direction to get their life set up. And that's good government.
I wondered, I should have asked him because he was talking about the fee issue on the end. And I think he's right. You shouldn't be charged a fee by the government for exercising your constitutional right. That being said, I wonder if, when he's talking about that trust fund that they have, I wonder if a way to fill that up is to look at some of the activities or industries in our state that are pretty closely tied with, we know that they have a social impact. I'm thinking bars. I'm thinking
gambling.
Is there a way to apply a user fee there that would generate some revenue for the public defenders? Understanding that, those industries are just, I'm not trying to besmirch them or anything like that.
Of course not.
No, but we know, there's social headaches around them.
Right. There's addiction that comes along with those industries, and we all, as adults, I think in a free society, we want to make sure people have the ability to access those things, but it does come at a price.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that would be kind of interesting.
But kudos to Travis and his team again, grinding it out. And the legislature, I sort of jokingly said during his interview, we often call out the bad apples up there because it's often easy to do. But this is a big deal, as you pointed out, and the legislature did the right thing. And he didn't name names, but I'm sure there's lots of appropriators who know exactly who
and
they are.
that's tough. He doesn't want to leave people out or make it sound like some people didn't do. It's a team effort up there when this stuff goes through. There's lots of people that touch it on the process, and it's hard to list them all. Let's talk Minot a little bit. I was supposed to be on vacation last week, but I finally got some records in from the state of Colorado, and Minot has a mayoral election coming up in August. And once I had those records in my hand, I wanted to get them in front of the voters. So I ended up taking a day from my vacation and publishing some of that about the criminal records for two of Minot mayoral candidates. And it's really hard to set up. Like, I understand most people listening to this don't live in Minot and maybe don't care that much about local Minot politics, but things are kind of off the rails up here. I mean,
certainly with two of the candidates.
Well, we're having a special election in the first place because the previous mayor had to resign after he sent a pornographic text to the city attorney. So then,
mind you, minutes after being told that a police officer had committed suicide.
Right. It was the middle of a workday. So, make of that what you will. So he's gone now. And now we're having a special election. It's going to be held August 5th. And there's 4 people running, 3 of whom are current members of the city council: Mark Janser, Paul Pittner, Rob Fuller. They're members. There's also a 4th, a citizen named Hosea Royce. Rob Fuller has more than $17,000, roughly $17,000 in back property taxes that he's delinquent on. And then I found a criminal record where he pleaded guilty to domestic violence in Colorado and was ordered to do community service and was ordered to do domestic violence counseling and had to pay fees and fines. It was a deferred sentence. Once he satisfied that sentence, the matter was dismissed, but he pleaded guilty to it. Hosea Royce he's the 4th candidate, has all sorts of criminal background. He was a fugitive from justice for a while because there was an arrest warrant for him out of the state of Florida for resisting arrest. He was ultimately found guilty of that. And also he is suing the Minot Police Department and the Ward County Sheriff's Department over a search warrant that was executed on his property for bomb-making materials. Now, the person that they were looking for, apparently he worked for Royce's company and was ultimately convicted of 2 felonies for possessing a bomb and detonating a bomb. But now Royce is suing, saying that those search warrants weren't okay. So, I mean, all of this is going on. And I'll tell you, Jed, the really frustrating thing is, and I say this, like, this is probably against my interest as somebody who's in this business. I'm the only one reporting any of this stuff. The Minot Daily News hasn't carried any of it. None of the other local media have carried any of it. And I'm just kind of in shock at the idea that these things exist, verified by public record, and they're not getting any news reporting other than my efforts.
Well, and I think Councilman Fuller's response to the domestic violence coming to light was to attack you, that you, according to him, illegally got public records, which they're public records. One thing that he did not do is offer any denial or anything like that about the fact that he smacked somebody around and pled guilty to domestic violence.
Yeah,
that's
pushed to the ground and kicked was specifically from the police report. It was a girlfriend at the time.
Yeah, so no denying of that, just complaints about the process in terms of how this came to light. I mean, it's frustrating to me also with property taxes being so hot, and I sense from sort of where this guy is in a partisanship or ideological that he's probably one that complains a lot about, property taxes. Maybe he should stop complaining if he's not paying his anyway. Yeah. But I think the other lost story here is there's 2 really legitimate candidates here. Well, I made the mistake of watching one of the mayor's forums up in Minot just because of your reporting and how interesting I found it. But the 2 other members of the council, Janser and Pittner, seem like really, really good public servants who just want to do right by the city. And instead of, focusing on what they want to do the city, this Fuller guy who sounds like he's Trumpian, and then this Royce, is that his name?
Royce.
Yeah, seems like he seems like an interesting former reality show.
Former model. He was on American Ninja or something.
American Ninja Warrior?
Yeah, I think he was a contestant or something like that.
Unsuccessful, I assume.
I think so. Yeah, I don't track the reality show stuff that much, but I mean, interesting guy, but it just kind of, and this is going to be a special elect. Somebody asked me this morning if there was polling in the mayoral race, and I kind of laughed. Like, first of all, it's hugely expensive, and none of these candidates could probably afford it. But on the other hand, even if you could afford it, what's it going to tell you? How do you sample who's going to turn out on in a summertime, August 5th special election that is about as far from a regular election as you could possibly get on the calendar? I don't know who's going to turn up.
But it seems like usually in these cases, it's the people who are most motivated. And it seems to me like the Fuller type people are going to be the most motivated because they're complaining about the city all the time.
Hosea Royce, I was just looking at their fundraising. None of them raised a ton of money, but Hosea Royce has like the Sons of Liberty behind him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He, so they're very organized, very motivated. Rob Fuller has Mike Blessum, who's another member of the city council, who's been very active in statewide politics. He was one of the people, leading the charge at last cycle's Indy GOP state convention to unseat delegates and everything. He's very active in state politics, raises a lot of money. He had the Dakota Patriot PAC. He's got a new one. I'm forgetting the name of it now, but they raise a bunch of money. So it's...
Do you think that splits? I mean, if you have the Sons of Liberty and other conservatives supporting, does that split that vote? That's interesting.
So the interesting thing is I think Janser and Pittner probably split, but I think Royce and Fuller probably split too. So maybe it's a wash, but again, it's all going to matter who's going to turn up. I don't know.
So are Janser and Pittner well known?
Yeah.
They've been on the city council for a while?
Janser's been in local public service for a long, long time. Very well known. Paul Pittner's been on the council for a long time. Very well known. So they're I mean, it's anybody's ball game. I mean, it's a jump ball kind of. I don't know. I don't know how to handicap it. I will tell you.
Does it matter? I mean, is the mayor of Minot is it a strong mayor?
It can be. Yeah. Although we got to remember this is a special election. Whoever wins this is going to get to be mayor for like 9 months, 10 months, something like that.
Oh, and then is there a special for the open council seat if one of the sitting?
I think that they would appoint and then have, I would hope, so I kind of wish that they had just appointed the mayor. And then because we're going to have a regular election next year. So
is Janser the sitting mayor right now? Like, is he the acting mayor?
What they're calling it. Yeah. Since Tom Ross stepped down.
So do you feel, I mean, sitting up in Minot, I mean, do you feel a race is going on? I mean, are there yard signs? Are there like...
There are. And Hosea Royce has more yard signs than anybody, which is kind of interesting. But again, I never know how much to read into yard signs and, are there more yard signs in parts of Minot? I don't drive through every part of Minot. Right. So I don't know.
Who are you Rob, who are you voting for?
I haven't made up my mind. I think Janser and Pittner are both pretty great. I don't really see a lot of daylight between the two of them. So probably one of those personally, but what really worries me is two of these candidates are, and it really, you mentioned Fuller. It's been interesting because he's campaigned on transparency and accountability. At the council meeting that was immediately after Tom Ross resigning, he read this very dramatic speech to, about, doing better for Minot, to being accountable to the voters. But yet when someone found a public record about his domestic violence, pleading guilty to domestic violence, he, attacked. He went in attack mode, and it called me Mr. National Enquirer and suggested that for some reason, he was convinced that the only way that record could have come up was through a federal criminal background check.
And then he had the city looking into if people were doing background checks on them or something.
That was interesting too, where he claimed that he had a buddy in law enforcement run his name through the NCIC database. First of all, that's very dicey. Law enforcement is not supposed to be run. I mean, you could argue that was a search for a political purpose, not a law enforcement.
Sure.
No, I've gone to the BCI. They can't find any record that a search for Fuller was made. Fuller, during a meeting, because remember, he's on the city council, during a regular budget meeting, one-on-one with Captain Plessis from the Minot Police Department, told him that he thought that somebody was illegally running him through these searches. Captain Plessis searched his department to see if anybody had run Fuller's name, couldn't find anything. He went to the BCI couldn't find anything. So I don't know if somebody ran his name through or not. I think Fuller thinks that I had somebody run him through. I did not. One thing you have to remember about my background, I used to do background checks for a living.
Right.
The state of Colorado, much like North Dakota, has an index that you can search for criminal records. I put Rob Fuller's, I spent $20. I had to search his name twice at $10 a pop because I spelled it wrong. I had a typo and I spelled it wrong the first time, and that cost me $10. So I spent $20 on that, and I had to spend another $10.50 to get the record, get digital copies of the records. But I mean, he just, he claimed that I could have only gotten this through a search through federal database. It's just not true. He claimed that the state of Colorado doesn't send electronic copies of records. They only mail records. Not true. I mean, I have an email from one of the clerks at Larimer County in Colorado who emailed me the records. So I don't think I'm anyone special. They don't know me in Colorado. I went through the same channel anybody else did. And by the way, in one of my stories, I put the case number down there. So if you don't believe it's a public record, go to Larimer County, give them the record, the case number, and they'll give you a copy too. I'm no one special.
So Rob, we might think that these things are just like local issues, but we also saw this week the issue with the auditor in Burleigh County, where the county commission asked the governor to remove Mark Splonskowski from office. The attorney general advised the governor not to do that. Then the governor decided not to do it. But the governor's letter, as often correspondence from this governor, was pretty pointed in, essentially calling out the voters, that not saying that Splonskowski is exactly not doing anything wrong, but that it's up to the voters to hold this guy accountable. And I agree. I'm a voter in Burleigh County. I didn't vote for Mark Splonskowski. I can't believe he keeps getting elected, because this isn't partisan. This is incompetence.
How many times has he been elected now?
So he got elected to the city commission, and then he got elected auditor.
Right.
And he had to give up his city commission seat to be auditor. And now they've split up.
That's right. He tried to be both for a while, didn't he?
Yep. Yeah. It's a guy who hates government, but wants a couple, 2, 3 government jobs. And he worked in the for the county before he became auditor as well. But
the thing is, I thought Kelly's letter, I thought Attorney General Wrigley arrived at the right conclusion. I thought the governor arrived at the right conclusion. At some point, it's up to the voters to make better. And I wrote that was my argument in the column too. Voters have to make better decisions.
Right.
And we wonder, why are all these things happen? Well, they start at the local level. Most of the people who are holding office in Congress, and they're very high profile or whatever, a lot of them started in local office.
And it comes down to the voters paying attention. That's why I asked, are there yard signs and that kind of stuff around Minot? I worry that in Minot, nobody knows there's an election. But then on the flip side, you've got the Burleigh County auditor, who is number 87 on the ballot. Nobody's paying attention to that race when there's a presidential, congressional, legislative, and all these different things. So we need voters to lock in.
I wondered, some of these positions, like Burleigh County auditor, I wonder if we should even be electing. Obviously, we should be electing mayor of Minot, but
yeah. No, I agree with that, because we had a great auditor for like 30 years here, Kevin Glott. And then when he left, and now they're looking at splitting up positions. So it's half auditor, half treasurer, and you're electing one and you're hiring the other one. And those are all responses to Splonskowski being incompetent on his job.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what it is too. This isn't a political issue. This isn't an ideological issue. This is competence and character,
right?
And that should matter. But unfortunately, because they're playing for my team and they say the right things on Facebook, I'm going to vote for them, and it doesn't matter if they can do the job or not. And that's really a problem. The other thing is the veto thing. The veto controversy is lingering. to a frustrating degree. Do you think we're going to get a special session out of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, I do. And, and I think part of it is, Senator Hogan, Representative Ista had a op-ed that's been in all the newspapers this week, sort of defending Legislature Counsel. And I think part of that is just having the back of their employees. I don't necessarily begrudge them for that. I don't know. I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to claim to be one, but I don't know that it's a slam dunk as maybe Drew Wrigley and you have said. We got the first eye roll from Rob Port since coming back from vacation. I like that.
I don't know. Lawyers can turn anything into a muddy pond. It's
Right.
what they do. And I read the law and it's very clear. He's required to transmit one thing, a veto message. The veto message had no errors. What are we doing?
Yeah. No, I agree. And, and so I hope they don't come back into a special session. I don't think that letter said they're going to come back into a special session. I think it was mostly about defending the attacks on Legislative Counsel.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them attacks, but I mean, to me, I can't ignore. I mean, the governor issued some tough vetoes for Leg Counsel. They wanted some office space. He wouldn't let them have it. He issued some tough vetoes for the legislature. He kind of scolded them on ethics and transparency. And I look at this and I see gotcha. I think I think it's a little bit of, even though these are all Republicans we're talking, well, except I guess Representative Ista's on board, but for them, this is a Republican controlled chamber. If they come back into special session, it's going to be because the Republicans want to. So I think this is some good old fashioned, sparring between the legislative branch and the executive branch. But
at what cost? I mean, at some point it does come down to, is this worth the fight or not?
I am all for the legislature vigorously defending their rights, and I'm all for the executive branch vigorously defending their rights. There's a reason why we set these branches of government up to be somewhat adversarial. For everybody, right? You'll remember Civics 101, the separation of powers and all that stuff. That stuff's important. That being said, I'm looking at this and I don't see what the threat is to the legislature's authority. I just don't. That the governor, he's not trying to withdraw his veto after he issued it. He's just saying, this is clearly what I meant. We made a clerical error, but we all know what Kelly was trying to do. It's completely.
Yeah, and I think spending the resources that it would take to do a special session to fight about $150,000 veto is a mistake. And then nobody's challenging that. Nobody's challenging the Attorney General's ruling. I mean, if the legislature wants to do something, I suppose they could take it to court, right?
But they're not doing that.
No.
It's going to get a special session, which might be more expensive than litigating it, depending on how they do it, I guess. But
right.
I don't know. It's very tiresome and it just seems very petty. That's my perception of it.
Yeah, and I read it as them having the back of their staff, and I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with it being July 9th, and we're still talking about last legislative session, and not the good things that they did, like we did with Travis Finck, but
like our previous interview, yeah.
But this petty, I don't know if it's petty, but it's certainly small. I think it's certainly small.
Yeah, I feel there's nothing wrong with letting this one go in the future. Yep. The future governor who colludes with the Attorney General on abusing his veto authority or something, you can sue then. Nothing's stopping you from suing then. There's no we're going to set a precedent. This doesn't set a precedent.
And this isn't going to happen again, right? There's no way that a governor's office is going to screw up the artwork again on something like that.
I have a feeling they're going to stop sending artwork.
Yeah, I think that's the safe bet.
That's probably the thing to do. You don't need a visual aid. Just send your letter describing what you're doing and we can move on with our lives. We got some listener feedback.
Love it.
Including a voicemail. The text we got is about the federal lands issue. So we'll do that in just a moment. And that actually plays into our guest on Friday. And then the other one is a voicemail from Danny in Bismarck. I think we got that queued up. Let's play it.
Hi, Chad and Rod. This is Danny Kennewick from Bismarck. I'm a regular listener to the podcast. I enjoy them greatly and find them to be very helpful. I get a lot of surveys about current issues from companies. I have no idea who they're representing. I would like my thoughts to be known, but I don't know who to trust. Do you have any advice about how to find reliable or how to identify reliable surveyors, considering today's issues, political and otherwise? Thanks much. Bye.
I actually think Chad has a lot more experience like hiring pollsters. I just want to add, I don't ever get surveyed for anything. And I wonder if that's because I get removed from lists because people know who I am and they probably don't feel like I'm probably a good part of a sample. That's probably good on them. But I always laugh, people like, oh, I'm getting surveyed all the time. And it's like, I never get surveyed. I never get the calls or the texts. It never happens. But
So Rob, I will tell you, every poll that I've ever been part of, we remove Rob Port. And I'm not joking about that. I mean, part of the goal is you don't want to have reporters part of it because you just as soon it not be in the news, right? And so you do remove reporters if you're smart.
what the heck?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Next one, maybe we'll put your name on it. We'll send you a fake survey. So I think the question is a good one. And I get quite a few polls these days. And one of the things I like is now they often come via text message. So if you send me a poll, then I'll screen grab it and send it to Rob. So if it's something interesting, he can write about it. But I don't think you have to worry about, I think you can do the surveys, right? I mean, I think it doesn't, I wish more people would identify because often I'm from ABC Research and we're doing but it doesn't say who's paying for the poll in the survey. So I think fill it out. I think where you really need to discern is when a poll gets released. And I've, again, been part of releasing polls. I work for an interest group. And so I'm going to release polling that helps my case. If I'm a candidate, you're going to release polling that helps your case. And so I think anytime a candidate or a specific interest group is releasing polling, you got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. I also think that we've seen some polls from organizations in the last year or so that have screwed up some questions. I mean, there was a poll that was done before the election that included a candidate who is not running for U.S. Senate. I think that sort of takes away the credibility of the whole poll. So I think you could do the surveys, fill them out, because I think it's important that there's a good sample. But then when you're seeing the results of those surveys, just take it with a grain of salt. Now, I will tell you, when North Dakota United releases a poll, and I'm saying this sort of flippantly, I trust our pollster 110%. We wouldn't pay somebody the amount of money you have to pay to get a poll done unless you trust the information that's getting back. I mean, because most of the time when you're doing a poll, it's not for the public, it's to make decisions internally.
I think for me, like there's pollsters, there's a group of pollsters that poll in North Dakota a lot. And so there's some of them that I know do good professional work, even understanding they're working for a client and the client selecting what comes out. But like DFM Research, I know, Chad, your group does a lot of work with them.
Yeah. Pat Finck,
they're A+. Pat Finck has worked with them as well. They're top notch when there's a DFM Research poll out. I'm paying attention. But all these polls are fallible. And I'd say not because of methodology or anything, but they're a snapshot in time. These things are complicated. There's tons of variables. I think polling's gotten harder, but they're also adjusting to that. The one thing I would say, first of all, about whether or not you should take a survey, completely up to you. If I got them, I would take them. But, just obviously be careful if they're asking for like super personal information. Don't give that. If they're sending you a link or something to click, be careful about that with your security because there's scammers out there. Who might use polling to try to mask what they're doing. But like in terms of how to react to a poll as a member of the public, I think they're interesting, but I don't think you should change your mind because of a poll. You change your mind because of the facts or somebody makes a persuasive argument or something like that. But polls are just interesting. They're just a measurement, right? It's interesting that I'm 5'11", but it doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. They're a tool. They're interesting. Certainly people like me like to write about them because sometimes, when we're talking about a race, we want some insight into how the race is doing. Also, the other thing reacting is look at lots of polls. I always really appreciate that in a race. We have even if they're from candidate sources, lots of polls from lots of different sources and surveys. And then you can kind of build a matrix and see, okay, well, they're all kind of grouped together in the same area. That's pretty significant that they're all sort of saying the same thing. things like that. So that's
the average of polls is the best thing, because that's like a huge sample. I also think you should be dubious if something sounds too good to be true. Like if you see a poll from a candidate who has close to zero name ID and is running against somebody who's well known, especially if it's a Democrat running against a Republican, and it says we've got a path to victory. Well,
a Democrat running as a Republican in North Dakota,
right? But that's often a fundraising poll, because often candidates who are challengers need a poll that shows them viable to raise money nationally.
All due respect to Katrina Christensen, I understand what she was doing, but at one point she released a poll saying that she was like within 1 point.
Yeah.
In the North Dakota Senate race, and that just wasn't reality.
And I think also pay attention to sample size, plus or margin, the margin of error, because sometimes you'll see these things that are like all of a sudden they're like at 9% margin of error because they only did a sample of 180 people. That's not scientifically significant. I mean, when you think about the plus or minus, that means one number might be up or down 10 and the other number might be up or down 10. You might have polls off 20 points and still be in the margin of error.
That's a dartboard.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you much. So, but yeah, I mean, really, North Dakota would be served well if we had more polling.
Yeah.
During the election year, and we're all trying to find out, who's ahead, who's behind, how the ballot measure's doing. The more polling we got, the better. Is good. All right. Next text is from Tony in Grand Forks. He says, I was listening to episode 614 of the podcast.
We've done 614 episodes.
Well, some of those were before your time.
Okay.
Episode 614 of the podcast, and I had some thoughts. I disagree with the selling of public lands. Naturally, the conversation of what makes America great has been a focus of our politics for the past decade or so. I think our vast collection of public lands is one of the best examples of why America is great. Before the U.S., there were virtually no protected public lands in Western nations. Only the kings and lords of Europe could afford to own, hunt, and recreate on their forests. Not only is the U.S. unique in having created them, but also in maintaining such an impressive collection for generations to enjoy through hunting, fishing, hiking, as well as learning about wildlife through conservation. Once these lands are sold, we can never get them back. Some might see it as bloated government, but I think it's exactly what government should be doing. Government should be the arm of the people to achieve a collective good against a stronger entities. In this case, the government holds these lands for the people to enjoy and protect them from being developed by special interests like the fossil fuel industry or luxury home developments. Given the finality of this decision, I don't think it should be taken lightly. And if you look at Senator Lee's proposal, there is no requirement for public hearings before the land is sold. We should note that I don't know when this was sent in specifically, but Senator Lee's proposal ultimately got axed. And I was reading an article, it was really interesting. Like, there were a lot of people on the right and even a lot of people in the Trump movement who came out against that. And, I think previously, Chad, I talked a little bit about like Yellowstone, the very, very popular TV show. And the degree to which like that was about this issue. That was about this specific issue and a rancher, kind of trying to fight off developers and everything. So there are more people on the right on board with this issue than people realize, I think, sometimes.
And first let's clarify that Senator Lee is Senator Lee from Utah, not Senator Judy Lee from West Fargo.
That's right.
Not to cause any confusion. I think when we've talked about this before, I mean, the politics of this is weird and it's difficult.
Right.
And so I've said it. I've seen so many nonpartisan right of center folks in the West and Midwest this is their issue. Public lands is their issue. In Montana, this is their issue. So I think this is an interesting political. I appreciate Tony's comments here because it really is what the purpose of public lands are. Yeah. And like you and I've talked about, well, which public lands? And that's the problem. And you end up with the slippery slope argument. And
interestingly, and thank you so much, Tony, for sending in the text. And both of our, also to Danny as well. We really appreciate the feedback and like including it in the show. And by the way, if you want to, you can leave a voicemail or send us a text to 701-587-3141. We have John Bradley from the North Dakota Wildlife Federation coming up on Friday to talk about this. And this is an ongoing debate. Even though Senator Lee's amendment to the quote unquote big beautiful bill didn't happen, This is going to be an ongoing debate, and I'm not afraid of having it. The one I generally agree with what Tony said. The one caveat is I don't think every acre of the enormous land holdings that the federal government has needs to continue to be in federal land. Not all of that land is pristine backcountry hunting. Some of this land can be sold. Some of it can be allowed for energy development or other types of development. We can have these debates, but I think if we're going to have them, there need to be public hearings. There needs to be public input. We need to have a robust debate about what acres we're talking about. I think Senator Lee's amendment was like 3 million acres. That was a fraction of 1% of all the federal holdings, national.
I think the other thing that makes this interesting locally is the fact that Governor Burgum is right in the middle of it, right? I mean, he's the Interior Secretary. I mean, he's in charge of many of these public lands. So I think it's a super interesting conversation. Again, I think it's one of those things that doesn't nicely fit into a D versus R box,
right?
Because there's a lot of, and I will tell you, we talked about chronic wasting disease at one point on this show. People who like to shoot things and like to go fishing are passionate about this kind of stuff.
And they are, and they are their own group that kind of runs across, ideological, cultural, political spectrum. So, very interesting issue. Very much looking. John Bradley from North Dakota Wildlife Federation coming up on Friday. Very fascinating topic. But I think there's a path forward where we could find some middle ground on this. But I
think the key is specificity, right? I mean, we need to know what lands we're talking about. I agree.
Like, you want to sell Yellowstone? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right.
But we have to have public comments. We have to, and so.
But is it like an abandoned missile silo somewhere that could be turned into something better? Why not? Why wouldn't? There's some things that we can do there. All right, that's coming up. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, thank you for the listener feedback. Appreciate that. Please send it to us. We love incorporating that in the show. Next show coming up Friday. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. I never get surveyed. I never get the calls or the texts. It never happens.